What's good, fellow outcasts and other rejects? It's JNUzuller here, and welcome to the We the Celestials, the anime outcasts. First things first, if you're new here, we upload anime what-ifs. Secondly, we hope you enjoy our content. If you do, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Now, let's get into the video. When we last left off, Izuku had gained One for All from All Might, but something went wrong in the transfer process, mistakenly giving him Black Whip instead of the base strength boosters that he should have gained. That brings us to now, with Izuku being in the entrance exam attempting to save Uraraka from the rampaging zero-pointer robot by wrapping his tendrils around it as he desperately clings to a different building with more tendrils. As Izuku feels his arm being torn out from its socket by the strength exerting from the war machine, he roars for Ida, who was just watching while frozen by shock to get Uraraka out of there. It takes a minute for the speedster to actually do anything as he just stares at Izuku, in awe by his heroism. But he quickly rushes in, scoops up Uraraka, and blasts out of there to safety in a blur. Then, with a huge surge of adrenaline fueling him, Izuku starts tightening his whip grip around the zero-pointer, eventually tearing through its vast metal chassis, and splitting it into multiple lifeless pieces. While swinging down to the streets below, Midoriya calls out to Ida on his way down. So do you think I'm taking this seriously enough yet, Four Eyes? He sarcastically asks, all while calling Ida by his new nickname. Similarly to Bakugo, Izuku gives most people nicknames, though his names were commonly less rude, and more for jokes. But he didn't get a reaction out of Ida as he lands. Instead, he just stares at the violent burns now scattered around Izuku's arms. Oh, don't mind them. They're only small burns. That's what I get for using my quirk so reckless. Midoriya chuckles before collapsing from the pain and exhaustion caused by his previous actions. The next few bits play out close to canon, so we don't need to go into much detail. Deku gets healed by Recovery Girl before going home and waiting for his results to come back with barely any contact coming from All Might. He's incredibly surprised when his results come back, and it turns out All Might will be teaching at UA. Though, he's not as shocked to find out that he has passed. That brings us to Izuku's first day at UA. It begins with him donning his new uniform and sprinting out the door, even though he was in no rush. But yet he chooses to rush there on foot by parkouring through the city. He's mainly doing this to get a bit of his excitement out before any of his classes start, and he also wanted an excuse to test his upgraded quick movement capabilities without Black Whip. When he gets to UA and finds his class, his spider sense starts going off, trying to warn him about something, but Izuku just shrugs it off, while thinking it was a regular classroom. How bad could it be? As he enters, his heightened senses are basically overloaded by Bakugo and Ida, both being in a loud shouting match with each other. But before they could finish arguing, they both looked up at Izuku.
Holy shit, you actually got in!
Bakugo laughs out as Ida aggressively charges up to Izuku, while loudly exclaiming that his name is Tenya Ida, and he was incredibly sorry for how he treated him during the entrance exam. On instinct, Izuku jumps back and goes to shoot a web at Ida before barely stopping himself. He then explains he knows who he was very well, and then formally introduces himself as Izuku Midoriya. With that, Uraraka walks up behind, triggering the class interaction they have, though a lot less awkward due to both sides being more confident. Most things go the same until Aizawa pops up, and then forces his new students to partake in the quirk apprehension test. The main difference is that it isn't Bakugo who is called up to throw the softball. Instead, it's Deku. As he walks up to the plate with a kosher grin, he asks Aizawa if after he throws the ball he would be able to affect it with his quirk. His teacher glances at him for a couple of seconds, as if he was an idiot before saying, anything goes, just stay within the circle. So, with that, Izuku throws the ball naturally. As it barely gets into the air, he latches a web line onto it before starting to spin it like a lasso, eventually letting go and shooting it even further into the air, getting an adequate 649 meters. The class claps for Izuku, with Bakugo staring, his mouth wide open in shock. Keep in mind, up until this point, he'd never actually seen Izuku use Black Whip, or his upgraded quirk. As they started doing the other events, Bakugo questions Deku on his sudden power-up. He starts off muttering it to him, looking for the answers, but as things progress, he goes into a full-force yell as he demands an explanation. Though, his repeated attempts to get something out of Izuku lead to nothing, as he just shrugs it off while saying it was just pure hard work and training, which wasn't a complete lie. As for the events themselves, Izuku would do quite well in them because of not being quirkless, or having a self-damaging ability, obviously. He easily gets higher scores than people like Minato and Toru, but still getting lower than people like Shoji and Bakugo. There's not really much to cover here, except for one moment during the 15-meter dash. Because of Izuku's heightened reaction speed, he starts running the literal second Aizawa says start, making it look like he was going to cheat. Aizawa doing the only rational thing he could think of, erasing his quirk midway through the dash. As Izuku gets near the end, he jumps off the ground and fires a web ends at the ground to pull himself back there. But his black tendrils start fading into thin wisps of smoke, with his spider sense going ballistic. He turns around frantically to see Aizawa with distinct, bloodshot eyes, intently staring at him. That's when he made the connection on who was teaching the class. Eraserhead, the Erasure hero. You went too early. Do it again, he coldly muttered, as he stares down at Izuku. The boy nods quietly, and does what the fabled hero asks him to, not wanting to get on Eraserhead's bad side on the first day. But that raises a question. His Erasure quirk allows him to negate any non-mutant type quirk, so it seems his spider sense was counted as a mutant type quirk. When the other events were finished, Aizawa shows the student their scores, and who was getting expelled. Izuku does pretty well, getting to 8th place, a far cry from his near end of canon. So, to no one's surprise, it means Minato get expelled. With that, Aizawa doesn't do much else, except for telling the students they could go home. So, Izuku does exactly that, walking home with Bakugo. It's here Bakugo would try one more time to get the truth out of his friend. Come on, Kachan. It's not like someone can get bit by a radioactive and then just suddenly get a new quirk. With no proper response to that, Bakugo quietly accepts that excuse and moves on from it. Similarly to canon, Uraraka meets up with the pair outside the school gates and starts calling Izuku by his nickname, Deku. This gets laughed out of Bakugo as he explains the origin of the name, saying it was supposed to make fun of Deku before he got his quirk, but it lived on thanks to Bakugo's persistence. Moving forward to the next day, most of it would go the same. Our first change comes at lunchtime. Normally, Izuku would sit next to Uraraka and Ida. Although Uraraka stays, Ida is replaced by Bakugo here. This was mainly because Ida didn't want to associate with someone he found disrespectfully ignorant and unpleasant, aka Bakugo. After lunch, All Might comes crashing through the door and explains it was time for combat training, going on his usual spiel about how heroes have to look the part. Izuku and Bakugo both turn to face each other, with childlike excitement in their eyes. They've been waiting for this for a while. Now that allows us to talk about Deku's hero costume. Since he has a quirk of his own here, his mother isn't filled with much guilt. Barely any, actually. Instead, she was incredibly proud of Izuku, putting forward a lot of money to have a specially made costume straight away, meaning he skips straight to his second costume from the standard canon, though with two minor changes. Deku's bunny-like cowl would be replaced with a traditional Spider-Man-like mask, with the trademark large white compound eyes, but without the signature webbing pattern. This was mainly to protect his face from anything while swinging around with Black Whip. The other change would be in material, her gloves. His white gloves would be made out of lighter and thinner material, letting him spin webs like normal. Plus, they could be easily removed, while his sleeves could be rolled up with ease, giving him access to the more destructive side of Black Whip. When the students make their way to the familiar training ground from the entrance exam, they are greeted by All Might again, who explains the exercise. I won't bore you with the details since most of you already know what type of training this is, but all you need to know is the teams are pretty much the same. Deku and Uraraka versus Bakugo and Ida. The two old friends throw a couple of friendly insults back and forward, before the hero and villain situation starts. When it actually starts, Bakugo and Ida get a few minutes to prepare within the Baron Bomb Room. Ida goes straight to thoroughly inspect the room in which they were to be protecting, not noticing Bakugo rushing headfirst through a maze of corridors within the mock building, in the hopes of getting a drop on his friend. Move over to said friend. Deku starts muttering a plan out loud to Uraraka outside, which she barely gets the gist of. As Bakugo skulls through the building, for what feels like hours, He finally finds Izuku in a mostly empty room, with windows on the right and left side, laying down in a web hammock, appearing to be browsing the internet. Took you long enough, Kachan. I thought you'd get here quicker. Deku yawns, purposely preying on Bakugo's anger issues to lure him into attacking first. He takes the bait straight away as he lunges at Deku, firing a vicious explosion at him, making assumed contact. Though, as the smoke clears, his adversary seemingly disappears. Then, after a few seconds of painfully loud silence, Izuku comes crashing through the right window, kicking Bakugo into the opposite wall, using the explosion as a smoke screen, and leaping out the left window. That attack was made by swinging back around to strike on the right side. But before Bakugo makes contact with the surface, he uses more explosion to spin himself around and lunge at Deku once again. This time, his attack gets narrowly dodged due to Izuku's spider sense. This sparks a back and forth between the two, letting Deku test out a myriad of combat strategies against Bakugo, such as trying to web up his gauntlets or his hands, failing when Bakugo unleashes the stored sweat from his support items. Though, throughout their encounter, Izuku would still be on his phone while fighting and dodging, really showing off his spider sense and reflexes. As the fight moves through the building, and into a long and narrow corridor with multiple connected rooms, Bakugo briefly looks at Izuku's screen, seeing it as some sort of messaging app, as he leaves over the door and to the other side of the arena.
Take this serious, goddammit!
Bakugo roars as he prepares his grenadier bracers for another large-scale explosion, but Deku just starts chuckling as he flashes his phone screen. He barely makes out who the messages were being sent to Uraraka, and what the most recent one was. Now. Bakugo starts panicking as he tries fruitlessly to get his gauntlets not to fire, but it was useless, as the pin had already been pulled just moments ago. Then, from one of the side rooms, Uraraka jumps out and tags Bakugo, making him feel completely weightless. Thanks, Outcasts and Rejects, for watching till the end of the video. If this part gets 20 likes, we'll continue this what if, but if it gets 50 likes, we'll upload it this week. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video to get the next part early.